Hello again, and welcome back to the Target Smart podcast. I am your host, Albert Morales. It brings me great pleasure to announce my next guest, our friend Kristian Ramos from Autonomy Strategies. But before I get into that, I just want to remind everyone that you can find us on all the usual platforms, including YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe and give us a like and share with your friends and family because we're very excited about this show. We're still in its nascent phases, but we're very excited about what the future holds for it. Our next guest is Kristian Ramos. He is a longtime friend of mine, a native son of Arizona. You might recognize him from CNN, CBS, Fox, PBS, New York Times. He's always out there spreading the good word. And what I like about Kristian is that he always has some substantive data to share with the audience. So without further ado, I am going to bring in Kristian and let you all see his wonderful face. Kristian, we go way back. Um, why don't you share with our audience how you got your start, where you grew up, and what led you to get involved in politics, and share a little bit about your background with our audience before we get into the bread and butter of our main topic, which is Latino organizations and where they are today versus where they were when we all got started in this business.
So I largely grew up apolitical. I always think this is an interesting part of this conversation. And thank you, Albert, again, for having me on the show today. Really appreciate it. But yeah, I was apolitical growing up. My focus was on skateboarding and reading books and listening to music. And I didn't really think politics was for me at all. I was born in El Paso, Texas, and I was raised in Arizona. And I didn't realize that I was living in a red state or a blue state. I just, was being an annoying teenager. And then in college, I actually got an internship with Haku on sort of a lark. And then I came out here and I ended up getting a really cool paid job out of it. And I just stayed. And I've been here ever since. And it's interesting because my first job was working for LULAC, of all places. And then from there, I got a job working for Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid as a staff assistant. Then went on to do press for the Majority Leader for a number of years. And then I was the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, a communications director. And then I did some work for the mayor of DC around ACA implementation aimed at Latinos. And I always tell people, if I could do it over again, I wish I had reversed the trajectory of my career, which I started in local politics and then worked my way back up to the Senate, because I really did not appreciate the work and the place that I was working for the majority leader in the Capitol doing communications work.
So who would you say gave you your first big break, though? I mean, we
That's
all get these jobs, right?
that's easy. Rodell Molyneux, who is now heading up Rock Solutions, and he literally, I it's so funny. I can see it like it was yesterday. Rodell was maybe the only Senate staffer at the time who had a full afro. He had an afro at the time. And he came into the office, and I was a staff assistant, and we would talk. He would always say hi to me, I think. And then I don't know how he found out that I wanted to do comms work, but he did. And then he asked me to interview, and I did, answering the phones in the rapid response press office in the Capitol. To this day, the hardest job I've ever had. That job was 24/7, work, just campaign style, never letting up. Holidays, you name it.
Yeah, it prepared you to what you're doing today. So in that realm, what would you say to when I got to this town, you could count the number of Latino chiefs of staff on the Hill on one hand and have many fingers left over. what would you say to? But now we're everywhere. I go to the Hill from time to time to meet with whomever, and I see brown faces everywhere, and it's great. It's great. It's not an easy place to work, right? The wages. Everyone has this uh, idea that these people working on the Hill make a lot of money, but they're basically making less than minimum wage when you think about the hours that they have to put in. You just described how hard it was working uh, in the Senate. But what would you say to the young Hispanic kid that's wanting to break into the political space and become a highly recognized operative like yourself?
All is possible, but you have to put in the work. You have to put in the reps. And it's so funny. When we're talking about this, I remember a story when I worked in the Senate, in the Capitol. And one of my jobs was I had to read the news to the senator every morning. So you go in like at 4 a.m. to prepare it. And then at like 7 o'clock, he would call you and you would read it. I remember one time I got sick and I threw up. I went to there was a bathroom right behind where I sat. I threw up. I went back. I read the senator the news, got off the phone, and went back and threw up some more. And then I think I finished out my my half day or whatever, and then I went home and drank Gatorade and just did nothing. But that's I don't want to say that's what it takes because that sounds a little toxic now that I say it. But those experiences really lasted. Those stayed with me. Those friendships that I made. I still see Rodell from time to time. I still see some folks there. And the other thing that is crazy about this experience in Washington, D.C. is that you can be working with somebody and then 5 years later, they're the deputy chief of staff in the White House.
I've had that experience where the intern is the managing director deciding whether or not I'm going to get that contract. And thank God I was nice.
that was my other piece of advice. You have to be nice to everybody.
Yeah.
It really pays if you're, you don't want to be a jerk. I've worked with a lot of jerks in this town, and if you're successful enough, you can be a jerk, I guess. But really, the best advice I give is hang in there, because it is hard, and then be nice to everybody, because you never know who's going to be your boss.
When I was in my lobbying phase many moons ago, I remember going into a pitch, and it was this big corporation, and I worked really hard, night and day, to get that proposal ready. And I went in there with a couple of the partners, and we walk into the boardroom, make the pitch. So why our firm was the best one to hire. And I'm walking out of there, my chin held up high, thinking, we got this, right? And then the partner puts his arm around my shoulder as we're walking back down the hallway. And he says, Albert, I'm going to give you a piece of advice that I hope you take to heart. I think you did really well in that pitch. Under any circumstances, you would have gotten that contract. But you're not getting it because the decision maker in there is a woman that I angered unnecessarily many years ago. So the lesson learned is never make an enemy out of someone you don't have to. And I try to go out of my way to do that. It's hard in this business, right? Because you're working with, some very strong characters, and they're not always nice. I tell the young people that 80% of life is being nice to people. People always say 80% of life is showing up. I say 80% of life is being nice to people and treating everyone equally. The rest is, you can pad the rest. But if you're a jerk, you're going to have a hard time in this business.
Well, it's funny. Before we go to the next thing, the other piece of advice I always tell people, and I think this is one of the most true things I've ever heard, maybe in politics, maybe in life, but somebody was telling me years ago, an Arizona operative, told me, look, you don't have to be loved. You don't have to be respected. People don't even have to think you're very smart, but you do not want to give anybody a reason to block you from something unnecessarily. Like, make sure that you are, that you cross your I's, dot your T's, that you're always respectful to everybody. And yeah, and that's an important thing. And I think that is 100% true. That is,
Yeah.
I wish it wasn't that way in politics, but it is true.
No, it is. It is. Okay, well, switching gears here, Kristian. So the institutional Latino national organizations that you mentioned you got your start with LULAC as your first gig. It used to be that you could count them again on one hand, right? LULAC, NCLR, now we're now known as Unidos, Maldef, but now they're in really good company. I mean, they got Mi Familia Vota. You have obviously the Latino Victory Fund. Um, you advise any number of these organizations. Way to Win, which is a powerhouse in itself. Um, do we need more? I mean, there's 62 million Latinos in this country, and we still seem to be struggling on the metrics, whether it's education attainment. I know there have been a lot of improvements, especially amongst Latinas, and also in startup businesses. You talk a lot about the number of startup businesses that have been founded by Latinas in this country under the current administration versus previous ones, and the numbers aren't even close. Do you think we need more, or do we need more organization to where we come together as one big under one big umbrella and sort of divvy out the pie so we're not tripping over each other? Because it seems like every election, whether I get deployed to New Mexico or Arizona, there's the same 2-3 organizations out there knocking on the same door, and it's like, oh my gosh.
So I think
we're still not there yet.
I think I'm gonna split the hair on this and answer this in a very different way than I think you're asking it. I think we have to change how and what we talk about to these voters. I think we have a lot of infrastructure out there. Obviously, we always need more. I think the bigger issue is that we are talking about issues that are so far away from the lived experience of most Latino families in this country. And this is, I'm sure, unpopular on some level, but I believe it to be true. And you're a pollster, and I think every poll going back 20, 25 years, we've talked about this before, Latinos say, oh, I really care about the economy. I'm really into the American dream. I'm really into providing for my family. I'm really into providing for my community. We don't talk to Latinos about any of those things. And I don't understand why. To me, how I look at this is, it's like if I was McDonald's and I hired a pollster, and the pollster came back and he said, well, what people love about McDonald's the most is they love your hamburgers with cheese and pickles. And, the quarter pound with cheese is a killer. People love it. And then I'm at McDonald's and I turn around and I do my ad campaign around chicken McNuggets.
Yeah.
And then people don't buy then people stop eating at McDonald's. And I'm like, whoa, I don't understand what's going on here. And I'm like, well, the data is very clear. It is hamburgers, sir. Hamburgers is what the people want. And we're not giving people hamburgers. We're giving them, 20 other things. And it always amazes me. I've had conversations with elected officials. I've had conversations with so many people where I'm like, hey, you should lead the charge on the economy. You should be out there talking about how we're creating opportunity and building wealth for Latinos. I mean, Joe Biden has created wealth and opportunity for Latinos in this country. No question. Are we talking about that to Latinos? No, not really. And so like that to me, this is like my forever frustration here.
Yeah, I agree. And part of that, along those lines, we often forget that Mexican Americans are still 2/3 of the Latino population in this country. Granted, we're all centered around Texas and California and Arizona and a couple of other states, but by and large, we are the majority. But it doesn't seem like we spend enough time addressing, the border in a way that captivates, that audience. The cartel issue is a real problem, right? I don't think you could find one family that hasn't been affected by it.
Sure.
But I digress. We'll save that topic for another day. But hey, I mentioned I really wanted to highlight Way to Win because it's one of the organizations that I'm really impressed by because it's so young. I think it was started in 2017. It was Tori DeVito, Jennifer Fernandez, and Ebony. Ebony's last name slips me, but I think it was Spate. Total powerhouse. Talk to us about the void that they're filling because I know that they were created to fund strategically some of the organizations that are out there doing the work. But what's on the plate for the next 4 months, and talk to us a little bit about the evolution and how you've helped them grow and spread their message, because I know a great part of their success lies with the work that you've done in highlighting those efforts. And anytime they put out data, I'm always looking at your Twitter feed or whatever it is you're posting out there.
Yeah, I mean, Way to Win is very pragmatic. That's how I would describe that organization. And they are filling a void, which it is a little baffling to me that this void needs to be filled, but it is every cycle. Who is speaking to young Black, Latino, AAPI, white voters? Who is speaking to this multiracial, multi-generational coalition of voters that Democrats win they need to win every cycle? Way to Win is. And I don't understand why everybody isn't doing this, but they have invested in those groups in states in the South and Southwest to a degree that nobody else has since 2016. And that's why I work with them, because I came of age politically with Barack Obama and the multiracial, multi-generational coalition of voters that he put together. And, that's who we need to win. There's no question in my mind, based on every exit poll of every, presidential or midterm cycle, this is what we see. It's Black, Latino, AAP. These are the people who save Democrats every cycle. And so they're investing in there. And so they've done a lot of really cool stuff right now. We did a lot of research aimed at Latinos and younger folks, Black, AAPI, around this idea of better life, right? That we don't need to argue whether or not the economy is good, bad, but we do need to communicate to people that Democrats are giving them the tools to create a better life. And I think that's going to be the difference between winning big and not winning at all this cycle, telling that story in a way. And then also working on shoring up, building the profile of Kamala Harris as the vice president with Joe Biden at the top of the ticket. She's young. She's an immigrant. She has a lot of upside to her that we need to continue to elevate as we head into these last 4 months. And so that's where we're looking at. And then there's also Project Amplify, which is actually really an interesting project. We're collecting content around any number of issues. Right now, I'm working on some stuff around housing and immigration that we then we create the content, and then we pool it, and it's open source for people out in the States. If they want to use it in their programmatic thing, that we can white label it and they can use it in their local media markets. So yeah, a lot of good stuff.
Well, no, I'm music to my ears because, again, I think they're just doing phenomenal work, and I'm looking forward to their trajectory as they continue to rise. So here's a question I often get, especially from our white progressive friends. Given all we talk a lot about the rise of these many Latino organizations that are sprouting out throughout the country. we still don't have that one singular Latino or Latina leader, right? And I'm often like, my answer always wants to be, well, who's your white leader, right? It's not like and I know where they're going with this. It's this. So who's the Cesar Chavez? Who's going to be your brown savior that's going to speak on your behalf? But I think that question needs to be altered a little bit. But what do you say to folks when the obvious question comes up? And I see our leaders everywhere. If I'm looking at the Senate, we have Catherine Cortez Masto over there in Nevada. We've got on the Hill. We've got in leadership any number of members on serving on these committees. Obviously, they're ranking members right now. We don't know the majority, but we're kind of everywhere. What's your view on this broad topic? I guess we could say.
Well, what I think is really interesting about this question, and I've written around it, but I've never written about this, but I think it is important. We are Latinos in and of themselves are a multiracial, multi-generational coalition. And I think where it becomes tricky is somebody like myself is third generation Mexican American. I am a geriatric millennial. I don't speak Spanish. I wish I did speak Spanish. Some would say that I'm assimilated, right? That's a very dirty word in some.
I've never heard that. Assimilated.
But I think that's the tricky part for our community, is that there are people who look at somebody who doesn't speak Spanish and is third generation and is further away from the immigrant experience as not truly representing the values of a first or a second generation Latino who has gone through those things. And I think it's very complicated within the diaspora of our community and race and class and gender. And yeah, the different languages. I always find this fascinating too, right? Because like I said, I don't speak Spanish, but I am very aware that a Cuban in Florida Spanish is very different than a Puerto Rican in Pennsylvania's Spanish, is very different than a Texican like yourself. Like those Spanishes, I don't want to say they're different languages, but they're different. And so there's just all this stuff that has to be figured out to truly be that leader. And it's hard. Like the Castro brothers, I think, are very interesting. Julian, his Spanish it's okay. You know what I mean? But like for a second and third generation Latino, it's worlds away from their lived experience. So I think I always find that fascinating. And I've always tried to think of like how to write about that identity question, because it is absurdly complicated, I think.
It is, and I think it's the lived experiences, right? I mean, I joke with my close Cuban friends that they were born on third base, but they think they hit a triple because they benefited from the wet foot, dry foot policy. You imagine my dad had gotten a green card the minute he snuck across the Rio Grande when he was, a young boy. It'd been a lot. He wouldn't have gotten deported 5 times, but they have different views on immigration as a result, right? It's not something that's affected them. Sure, now that with the wet foot, dry foot policy now being behind them, it's a different issue. Same thing with our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico. They have a different view of the world as well. They see things through a different prism. Central Americans, you could argue, have it harder than Mexicans, because there's that famous song by Los Tigres del Norte, 3 times the wetback, in Spanish is what it translates to, tres veces mojado, because they have to cross 3 border patrols, I guess, basically, to get here. And so we're not a monolith, cliche. But I think to your point, until we finally come to terms as a community that we are all one, they don't view us any differently. You often hear the saying, we're all Mexicans. I think there's even a movie about it, or I read a book about it at some point. Um, but until we get behind that, I appreciate your point, but you were going to finish your thought.
No, I just remember very clearly during the pandemic. I was literally in this office right now. I had just started my own small business. And I can tell you, my first thought was not, where's the Mexican American agenda? My thought was, who is helping me pay my mortgage? Who's helping me pay for a second car? Who's helping me pay, who's helping me get my kid in the best school possible? And so, like, that to me, yes, I want to be seen. And actually, Joe Velasquez gave me this beautiful thing, which at the time, the advice, at the time I thought, well, this is so stupid and obvious that why is this? Why are you even telling me this? But I think this is very true of the Latino experience in this country. We were talking about making content, and he was like, don't worry so much about, how you're putting people in. But the important thing is people feel seen as a part of the community, as a part of our country, and then they're helping and they're a part of a team. And he said, our community, well, I'm paraphrasing here, but my view of what he was saying was that our community doesn't feel seen and doesn't feel a part of anything in this country, in this political context. And I think that is very true, and is also why we haven't been able to have a quote unquote leader.
Yeah, not from here and not from there kind of thing. No, talk about an unsung hero in Joe Velasquez. I'm not sure he understands how to download a podcast, but I'm going to try to send it to him and make sure that he recognizes that we did give him a shout out. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit here and go back to the state of play, which is the election. And so you two, we remember when you could count the states where the Latino influence was enough to tilt a statewide election. Again, using that analogy on one hand, and have a couple of fingers left over, right? New Mexico, Colorado, Florida, whatever. Now we're everywhere. We're in the Midwest, all over the South. God knows the West. Give our audience sort of a look into your forecasting brain, and for November, and tell them why they shouldn't worry. I have my own view, but I want to hear yours because you're in the trenches with the Biden campaign.
Well, here's what I'll say, and this is not my theory. This is the Simon Rosenberg view of things, who was an old boss of mine years ago, and I think it's true. There is a multiracial coalition of voters who are anti-MAGA. And that includes white people, right? White, Black, Latino, AAPI. There is a group of voters out there that every election since 2016 have come out and voted against Donald Trump. And I believe that to be true because of the special elections, the midterm cycles, the presidentials. We either win or we overperform expectations by quite a bit. And I think that coalition still exists. And honestly, Joe Biden is currently our nominee. And I think, regardless of what happens, that group of voters is very invested in voting against Donald Trump. I was actually just down in Arizona for a quinceañera for my goddaughter, Liliana. And I was surprised how many people came up to me at this quinceañera, working class folks, saying how much they hated Donald Trump. And they were like, "Wait, we know Joe Biden's old. Like this is not new, but this other guy is terrible." And we just want to pull the lever against Trump is basically what I heard over and over and over again in some version of that. So I think in a place like Arizona, I think in a place like Nevada, I think in a place like even Pennsylvania, Michigan, right? There's Latinos in those states. If it's close and we do the job right and we tell the story about what Democrats, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, have done over the last 3 to 4 years, I think we'll come out on top. But we have to do some of this basic blocking and tackling of attacking Trump, not each other, and highlighting this incredible record that we have as Democrats. We've done an incredible thing. The last thing I'll say on this, and I truly believe this: 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 1 year from now, people are going to look back at Joe Biden's presidency and say he was one of the most consequential presidents in the history of our country.
Yeah, they already are, or some are. Not enough.
But it's not the case. That's not the case that they're making to voters right now. And so that, to me, is sort of like where there's this disconnect between, like, I think there's broad consensus among Democrats that this administration, this presidency, was historic. We should tell that story today. We should tell that right now, not a year ago, a year from now, or 2 years out. Like, now is the time to tell that story.
Well, hey, I'm doing my part. The other day I was at Costco and I saw these aisles, and as far as the eye could see, of toilet paper, and I had this flashback. I was like, damn, 4 years ago they were rationing this stuff. And I'm like, thank you, Joe Biden. But it's those little things that people forget. We have short-term memory as a country. And I like to link in these undecided voters. They're like the average football fan that doesn't watch a game throughout the entire season, but they watch the Super Bowl. That's when they tune in, and that's when they pick their team. And that's kind of like what we're up against. And I don't know. I have my own views on this, and I have to bite my tongue because it's very easy for some of these positions to be misconstrued. But I do want to go back a little bit to your point about your experience at the quinceañera. There are some MAGA Latinos among us. Do you think that's a product of the Joe Velasquez commentary that they haven't felt seen? I've always argued, having done polling for the better part of my career, and I don't consider myself a pollster. I dabble in it, but when I got started in this business, and I would attend these Democratic trainings, the Tully Institute or whatever it was, we were taught to never waste a dime or a minute of your time on households that have no vote history. Well, that presents a major challenge for Latino households specifically, because so many of us, I'm first generation. My parents are immigrants. They're now citizens, but I can only think of the number of operatives who just ignored my parents because they didn't have a vote history the minute they became citizens. And so that continues, and it just becomes this repeating strategy that it's self-destructive. And I think now we're now paying the price for it. Because Trump did one thing that nobody had ever done. He went after the masses, just he would talk to people. And I have family in South Texas, for example, that they never heard from a presidential campaign. But here comes Donald Trump with these parades of trucks driving through their small towns, inviting them to join them, come join the Trump train. And for the first time in their life, Kristian, they had outreach from the presidential campaign in these forgotten towns in flyover country, and they felt part of something. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there. I know it's expensive, and you have consultants who were brought up like me with the understanding that you don't waste your time with voters with no vote history. But I still can't penetrate the consulting class with that message. I've never been able to do it. They will argue till the day they die. I'm sure that no, we just don't spend money people who don't vote. Well, okay, someone else will, because now it's cheaper to do it. You know, it used to cost several dollars to reach a household. Now you can see one of these, and
I hear what you're saying. I agree generally with the premise of your argument. I would only add, I don't think Trump is adding huge numbers of Latinos who are not already conservative, who are not already, the tío or the tía in the family who said questionable things at Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? I don't believe he's moving over,
or on Facebook.
moderate independent people. I don't see that happening. Moderate independent conservatives don't like Trump. Like Latino, it doesn't matter, right? Country club Republican Latinos hate Trump. Like that's been what I've seen. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're educated Latinos, basically.
Yeah. So he's just tapping into a Latino audience that was always with the party. Fernando Mondi has a line that if they nominated Satan himself to be their candidate, Satan would get 35% of the Latino vote because that's their bedrock group of people. Donald Trump does not pull more than that currently, like in an election. I'm not saying that there are polls out there that say all these different things. I'm just saying in an election, I've never seen him get, close to the 40% that George W. Bush did, who had a real Latino outreach, who had a real theory of the case to reach these folks. A lot of people make a lot about these Latino social media folks that are for Trump. I would bet a lot of money that those folks are paid by the campaign. I would bet that a lot of this stuff out there is paid for in terms of the supporter stuff that they put online. I mean,
the rappers and
all
that stuff.
Republicans pay for this stuff. They always pay. That would not surprise me at all. Like, I just don't see this as an organic thing that is out in the world. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have fans that are Latinos. I'm just saying those people were always Republicans. Those people were always they were always Dallas Cowboy fans. You know what I mean? They're not new Dallas Cowboy fans. They were always Cowboy fans.
Yeah. I don't discount that, but I don't also fully agree. Back to my rant on, the issue that is Mexico. It's more dangerous to go to Mexico, I think, than it is to go to Afghanistan right now. If you're in a car with U.S. plates, he's the only one out there talking about it. And I was talking to a member of the pork producers in Mexico, and they did a informal survey of their 500 whatever members, and they all asked if they supported the idea of Trump invading Mexico to take out the drug cartels. Every single hand went up because they are just fed up with the Mexican government and their just inept form of government. And it looks like we're headed toward another 4 years of socialist, communist embracing leadership there. And it's only going to get worse. So I think it would behoove us as Democrats to talk more about how we're going to get finally tough on Mexico versus tough on China. Tough on China doesn't appeal to anyone in my family. They want to hear a tough on Mexico policy. And until we start talking like that, it's just he can pick at the margins. And again, he doesn't need a lot. Trump doesn't need to pick off a lot of our people. But anyway, again, I digress. Fast forward November, we won the election. Where are you going on vacation? And don't say Arizona, because Arizona is not.
No, actually, this is funny. I will be going to India for a wedding, for a 3-day wedding. India, we may stop off in London first. I have a cousin who's my cousin's wife's sister is getting married, and their youngest daughter plays with our daughter. They're the same age, and I've always wanted to go to an Indian wedding. And literally at this quinceañera, they mentioned that they were going, and I was like, oh, I would love to go. And they were like, come. And I was like, yes, I will. I gotta buy our tickets, but yeah, we're gonna go check out India and an Indian wedding. I've seen movies, I've heard stories, I've seen social media posts, Indian weddings, 3 day long affairs. I'm sure I'll want that in my life in January, one way or the other.
Yeah, well, I'll be sending you a save the date for Martha's quinceañera. It'll be sometime in early next year.
Oh my God.
India, but
Oh my God.
it'll be a 2 day affair. We'll do a lot of Texas style, Mexican style barbecue here on the farm on the Friday before, and have a real party for close friends and family, and then we'll do the bigger affair on Saturday somewhere in Baltimore. But anyway, I got up on a tangent there talking about. I'm so eager to get past the election. Any final thoughts, Kristian? I think we covered a lot of good ground. I'd love to have you back again before the election, because I think you bring a perspective that is often lost when we turn on the cable news or talk radio, whatever, before we sign off here.
Keep fighting, man. Keep fighting till the end. Anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen with this election is lying. This has been unprecedented on so many levels. We have 4 months. I think the House is so winnable. The Republican Party in the House is more unpopular than MAGA, than Biden, than Harris, than everybody. They're like in the single digits in popularity, as I understand it. So they've had the most disastrous year of a ruling party probably in the history of this country. They are very beatable. We can beat them. We should win the House, right? I think we can win in the presidential as well, as long as we're united and are pushing in the same direction. The Senate is going to be tough, but I think we can also, right? If we're able to push us over the top in the White House, I think there's an opportunity to win there too. We've just got to keep our head down and do the work. I think we need to get everybody together and watch any given Sunday that speech that Al Pacino gives at the end about, it's a game of inches and we have to fight and we have to claw. That's where we are right now. That's where we are. So I don't know, man. We need some, like a limpia or something. We need to get people fired up here.
Yeah, it feels too much like the Bad News Bears right now, and not any given Sunday. Well, hey, again, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. To our audience, thank you all for tuning in. Remember to subscribe to the Target Smart Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Pandora, wherever it is you get your podcast, and go look for us on YouTube and subscribe and give us a like and share with all your friends and family. We'll see you next week with another special guest. For now, have a great weekend and go fight, win. Let's go reelect our president.